I don't typically make videos about products that I straight up don't recommend buying, but I'm afraid this will be one of those. So let's talk about Puffin OS. So I have two identical Redmi Go smartphones here, one in its original form with Android Go, which is a pretty typical Xiaomi phone that was built for developing markets, and one with this very bizarre new operating system called Puffin OS that is currently in a Kickstarter phase. The company sent me these two phones to test how Puffin OS performs against comparable, cheap Android Go phones, as well as against smart feature phones like KaiOS. So I've teamed up with Aaron from the Mr. Who's the Boss channel, and we will do just that. I will do a deep dive on Puffin OS in this video, Aaron will analyze KaiOS in his, and then once you finish watching both, there will be a link in the description below that will lead you to a poll so you can decide which one you like the most. Maybe Puffin OS, maybe KaiOS, or maybe just good old Android Go. Puffin OS is currently in a beta stage and can be flashed on a few reference devices like the Redmi Go and the Nokia One, both of which cost well below 100 euros here in Germany. That choice of early hardware gives you a pretty good idea of who the platform is targeting: users in developing markets who are probably deciding to pick up their first internet-enabled device. Puffin says cheap Android Go devices are not a good choice because they perform poorly, and KaiOS devices have awkward user interactions due to being feature phones. So users instead should consider getting a Puffin OS device, which they claim will run on cheap hardware but perform like a high-end Android phone. Sounds way too good to be true, but let's actually put that to the test. At first glance, Puffin OS seems a lot like Android, with a pretty standard home screen, a notification drawer, and so on. And that's because this is Android under the hood, but instead of running the Google Play Store and other Google services, Puffin OS comes with its own app store. Some of the pre-installed apps like the camera and the dialer are just regular old Android apps, but you as the user can only use the Puffin store to install web apps. The app selection is okay, I guess. You have things like Amazon, Dropbox, Facebook, Twitter, everything that works well as a mobile website, but you don't currently have access to services like Spotify, tools like authenticators, or anything else that mobile websites don't work well for. Anyway, the web apps you do get are packaged up to look and behave like native apps. And downloading them is quick because they mostly just put an icon on your home screen instead of actually downloading and installing a full app. If you've ever used progressive web apps on Android or even Windows, the experience is quite similar. Now you might be wondering what all of these limitations are supposedly good for, and here's the official explanation. So Puffin uses a technology that they call a remote browser, and they say that this technology accelerates all of the Puffin OS apps to the point where they are so performant that they outperform native Android apps or also websites running on regular Android phones significantly, especially on low-end hardware. Here's how that works. A typical browser, like Firefox or Chrome, runs on your device. When you want to open a page, like Twitter, it reaches out to Twitter's servers, which then respond with a bunch of files that your browser then displays on your phone as a web page. Pretty straightforward stuff, but Puffin claims that this is inefficient, because according to them, when a phone wants to open a website or an app, it actually has to talk to multiple servers most of the time. It has to go back and forth to collect files, and then once it has collected all of those things, it then has to assemble all of them into one website that it can then render on the device itself, which, if the phone doesn't have a lot of power, will take a considerable amount of time. The Puffin browser instead connects to a Puffin web server, who handles all the communication with the sites you want to load. It renders the page for you on a high-performance machine and then sends the results to your phone, which then only has to display the final image. Puffin claims that this significantly improves speeds. Now, if about 100 alarms are going off in your head right now regarding security and privacy, then worry not, I will get to that in a second. But first, let's take a look at whether or not this actually works, whether the performance on Puffin OS devices is actually any better than it is on Android phones. So I've compared a ton of apps between Android Go and Puffin OS, and for most, I have also compared both the native Android app that can be downloaded from the Play Store as well as the web app that can be installed on Android using Chrome. The web apps on Android and their Puffin OS equivalent should theoretically be the exact same apps, just one being rendered completely on the phone and one being rendered in the cloud. And my conclusions are inconclusive, I guess. Launching apps is almost always significantly faster on Puffin OS than on either of the two app versions on Android Go, which is impressive. Loading in lots of data is where the remote rendering technology seems to work best. but most other interactions within apps seem fairly comparable. I actually find that scrolling seems significantly smoother on Android Go in both native and web apps, and tapping around the UI is quite similar. Sometimes Android apps are a bit faster, and at other times Puffin OS ones come out ahead. In side-by-side comparisons like these, differences might appear big, but I think in day-to-day usage they would feel more or less the same. So Puffin OS certainly does not make an ultra-cheap device suddenly perform like a flagship device, which is pretty much what they claim on their website. And all of the apps that are available in the Puffin OS web app store can also be used as progressive web apps on Android phones using Chrome or Firefox or whatever browser you prefer. So I don't really see the point. And on top of not offering any incredible performance benefits, this remote browsing technology is actually incredibly problematic. Just think about it. All the online activity on a Puffin OS device goes through a Puffin server. Everything. Your chats, your emails, your health and banking data, and your passwords. Everything. That's right, as confirmed by Puffin on Facebook and indirectly to me via email when I asked them. They even have access to the passwords you submit. And they have to. Their browser, which runs on their servers, is the one that actually talks to all of the third-party services, like those of Twitter and Instagram and whatever. It is the browser that actually renders the web page before it sends it off to you. So it has to know all of the information that is in the page and whatever flows through it to be able to perform its task. So if you thought maybe Facebook or Google were a privacy nightmare, then this is on a whole other level. And when I asked them how we can be sure that they don't just misuse all of that data, they basically pointed me to their privacy policy. Maybe unsurprisingly, it is both hilariously short and vague for a company that deals with this much sensitive data. They basically just say that they only keep logs about users for 100 days, as if that should make you feel better, and then they pinky promise not to do any nasty stuff with it. None of their core technologies are open source from what I can tell, and when I asked them if they have at the very least maybe done some kind of security audits, they basically said no, because they have millions of users, many of which also pay, and nobody has ever complained about it, so they basically didn't feel like doing it. Which is just baffling. And beyond just security concerns, what happens if their servers are down for technical reasons? What happens if the company goes out of business? What happens if they decide that your device specifically doesn't deserve any support going forward? I mean, I guess at best, the device could just revert to doing local browsing like a normal Android phone would, and at worst, most of your apps could just stop working. Either of those seem like a bad option, especially for price-conscious buyers in developing countries who this phone is apparently aimed at, because those are the people who can't just afford to buy a new phone when their current one stops working properly. So I just don't understand how this remote browsing technology would be a benefit to anyone. And if all of that wasn't enough, there's just one more fun fact that I will let Aaron explain.
Okay, so as a final cherry on top, let's take a look at their Kickstarter campaign, which, if this whole thing wasn't already suspicious enough, will almost definitely be the icing on the cake. To start with, if you think about the kinds of people who can't afford to buy an expensive phone, how likely is it that they're the ones who've got money to back Kickstarter projects that may or may not result in usable products? They won't, and you're going to start to see that the goal of this Kickstarter campaign is actually not at all to raise money. Even if it was, the $28,000 that they're asking for is pocket change for a company that's trying to build something as big as an operating system. So if the goal isn't money, you might be wondering, what is it? Kickstarter is one of the best cheap promotional tools to generate hype, and to get the media, people like myself, people like Martin, to talk about them. I guess they were hoping for a slightly more positive review.
Thanks, Aaron. So apparently even their promotional strategy is fishy. And we could go on, but I think you get the point. Routing all of your traffic through a random company's servers, especially when that company isn't like a super reputable tech company, maybe not the best idea in the world, especially when there are actually better options out there. Aaron made a video about KaiOS and compared it to Android Go. You should definitely watch that one. It's linked somewhere here. And once you're done watching both of our videos, there'll be a link in the description below which will take you to a poll where you can let us know which of these three operating systems you are the most interested in: a KaiOS, Puffin OS, or Android Go. Don't forget to subscribe to TechAltar as well as the Mr. Who's the Boss channel, and I'll see you in the next one.